Hey pals, welcome to Framing Fiber. In this video, I want to talk to you about the frequently asked questions I receive from cross stitchers about picture framing. So grab your project and a cuppa and let's get started. So first, all of these questions that I'm answering came from the viewers of Floss Toss, which is a floss tube channel here on YouTube, hosted by my friends Rachel and Sue. I'll link to the video that I did with Rachel and Sue in the down bar. So this question is from Danielle Boots, Ditzy Mermaid, and Gary Ron. How many inches of fabric should a stitcher leave on the edge to be picture framed? Generally, a great rule of thumb would just to be 2 inches. 2 inches for the framer. It helps us have enough space to move your piece around when we're centering and squaring it. It also helps our hands. When we have to pull the fabric around the edges, it can put some strain on our joints. And so the more fabric we have, the more we can hold and the less strain on our hands. Those really tiny edges, although doable, they can hurt. So 2 inches would be so great. Are some fabrics harder to frame than others? Not really. The grid line that is created by the warp and weft of your fabric, so the vertical and horizontal lines that are woven together to make up the fabric, are obviously easier to see in fabrics like Aida cloth, and a little bit more difficult to see in a slubby linen. That said, it's still pretty easy to see. The Aida cloth, you will get a very straight edge, and sometimes the slubby linens need to be, they're a little bit more fiddly to get straight. But other than that, there's not really a fabric that's harder than the other. And so along those lines, the next question, does the count size of the fabric matter? No. It's obviously easier for me to see the count of the fabric and the threads of the fabric in a smaller thread count, but I don't think the size matters. No, that's more for you guys with your stitching, for your eyeballs. But those questions bring me into Nancy Smith's question. She ran into an issue because her fabric was labeled as 32 count, but when she got through to the end of her piece, she realized, no, actually it was 30 count. And so her 14.5-inch piece ended up being 16.5 inches. So those 2 inches took up a lot more space, which means that her piece went right to the edge. She has about 1/2 inch of fabric left. So she wants to know, can she still have that framed? Yes, you can definitely still have that framed. So if you only have 1/2 inch on the edge of the fabric, the solution to that for framing would to be use a mat border. So the mat border will then give you that space that you need between the artwork and the frame. That should be somewhere around 2 to 3 inches. Lori Mages wants to know if you can put a cross stitch in a floating frame where you can see the raw edges beneath the glass. Definitely. I do that a lot with batiks that are done on silks or on canvases that have been trimmed to the edge. A lot of multimedia or collage pieces as well. So you can definitely do that with cross stitch. If you work your piece to the very edge, like Nancy, the problem that Nancy had, where she came up to about 1/2 inch of fabric left, you could definitely mount that on top, and so that way you see the edges. Okay, so then Anne-Marie, she has a 4 seasons project, and she wanted to know if it would be better to put them in frames that are the same for each of the 4 pieces, or if the frame should be slightly different. This is really personal preference. It depends on what you, the maker, likes. There is a third option though, and you could have all 4 of those pieces put into one single frame, which is really neat. You can do it in a window shape, 1, 2, 3, 4, or you could put it together horizontally or vertically. And so if you have a specific spot in your house, like say there's a hallway and in between 2 doors there's a space that's 3 feet long, it would look really cool to put something vertical in that space. So think about where you're going to be hanging it before you decide what you want to do. Also, if you put all 4 pieces together in one frame, you're stuck, right? You can only ever keep it that way unless you want to pay to have it reframed. So if you're not sure if it's always going to live in the same space, or if you want to have the freedom to move them around, say at the holidays, you need to take them down and put something else up. 4 frames that are smaller can fit in different spots, different configurations. They don't even have to hang together. So there's lots of options that you can do with a 4 seasons project or any type of a project that has a series of pieces. And let me link below to a framing consultation video that I did with someone who also had a 4 seasons project. Leslie Rupp wants to know what the standard size spacer is that I use with needle art. I don't know if I have a standard. So if you're using matting in your design, the matting will act as the spacer. The more mats you use, the more space you have. So for instance, if you're using matting and you did a cross stitch that has a little charm or some buttons on it, you want to make sure that the matting is high enough so that the buttons don't hit the glass. Or if you're not using matting, your framer will use a plastic spacer that goes between the artwork and the glass, and they range anywhere from 1/8 of an inch to 3/16 of an inch. And they come in a couple different colors: black, clear, white, and like some like smoky gray color. Mostly we use black and clear because those are the 2 that you don't notice. So no standard, it really depends on each individual piece. If you have a cross stitch that has all kinds of specialty stitches, or if you have a needle point that has some like fluffy yarn in it, and you definitely don't want them crushed, you want to do a deeper spacer. Ellen Chester and Nancy Landers want to know if I pin or lace needlework and why. So I do both. I pin, I sew, I lace, and I also use a little tool that looks similar to a garment tag gun. It's finer by far than a tag gun, but it's kind of along that same premise. I use all of those different ways of mounting depending on what the application is. Sometimes if there's a mat, I'll choose one over another. If there's not a mat, I might choose differently. If it's an antique and the fabric is really fragile, I might pin that, or not pin it, I might sew that or lace that. Lacing is one of those things that there's definitely space, or I shouldn't say space, there's definitely applications that you need to lace, but they're very far and few between because materials for pinning are so much better. We can get stainless steel that won't rust pins. They work great. Those tags that I use, those little gun tags, those are an acid-free plastic material. They work as well too because they will not ruin the fabric. So it really depends on what you're doing. If I'm matting a piece, I don't necessarily need to have it pulled and wrapped around the edge because there is no edge to worry about. The fabric can lay down on top of a board because the matting will be on top of that. So because of that, I can sew through the board, or I can just tack it in a couple different spots. So it really depends on the application. It also depends on what the needle art is. Cross stitching and needle point, very different in terms of how they're mounted. So it changes from job to job. Renee wants to know if there's a trick to lining up a cross stitch to have it centered and straight in the frame. Yes, I definitely have tricks for you. However, even with the tricks, this is the most time-consuming part of framing your pieces. So just keep that in mind. If this takes you a long time to get done, you're not doing it wrong. It does take a while. So the first thing that I will tell you is cut your board to the size that you want it to be. So if you're not using matting, it means the board is going to be cut to the size of the frame. So you cut your board. Before you pick up your cross stitch, you take a marker and a ruler, and you find the center of the board on each side. So you rotate the sides, and on that edge, you're just going to put a little mark with your marker where the center is on each of the 4 sides. Next is your cross stitch. You need some pins. You need 4 pins and your ruler. You find the center of your artwork. You don't have to worry about how much space is showing, how much is being revealed. It's just the artwork. You're going to find the center, put a pin in on all 4 sides, lay it on top of your matting board or your mounting board, and then you're going to line the pins up with the markers and then pin them. It's going to be loose because from there you can tweak it to get it so it's exactly centered. You know, like you might have to move it over 2 thread spaces or down 3 thread spaces, whatever it is, to make sure that you have even threads around. Once that's done, tighten it up and you can start pinning. I hope that helps. So I've done a number of videos that have shown different ways of mounting needle points, and I will list the playlist in the down bar. Flora Peralta would love to hear some options on how to make picture framing more affordable. And then Becky Wilson wanted to know if I had any tips for DIY framing. They kind of go hand in hand. If you wanted to do the picture framing yourself, you could always have the picture framer mount your piece for you if you want it to come out perfect. The mounting is what's going to really make your pieces look professionally done. If you need matting cut, you could also have them cut it and then put it into a standard size frame yourself. To make the picture framing more affordable, you could definitely bring your piece to the framer already mounted. That will save them all the time and they can just get to the framing rather than the mounting. That could save you quite a bit. If you wanted to mount it yourself, follow those tips that I gave you in the last question. You could nix the glass. I don't recommend that necessarily because the glass will protect your piece from getting dirty. You could save money if it's something that, say it's for the holidays and you only bring it out once a year and the rest of the year it's wrapped up nice and safe. Maybe nix the glass. Nixing matting will definitely bring the price down too because you're not paying for the matting, but also if you don't have matting, it's a smaller frame. Matting, this is what some people don't realize, is matting will make the overall frame bigger because when you mat something, you don't mat over your picture, you mat next to your picture. So it adds anywhere from 2 to 8 inches depending on how big the matting is. So that could save you a significant amount of money. You could also, with flea market and thrift store finds, look for picture frames that are large, not necessarily wide, but large as in dimension. Those frames can be cut down. So don't look at the artwork inside. Don't worry about the glass. It's the picture frame you're looking at. And if you're handy, you could take it yourself to your little chop saw and chop them down and put them back together. Or you can bring it to your framer. They can cut it down for you and now you can put the rest of it together. So that'll give you a custom look without having to pay for the custom pricing. On top of that, once it's cut down, you could also paint it. So that could really add to the look of what you're going for and save you some money and keep it special. You know, saving on framing in a craft store, you're kind of going to end up with either really basic, plain, like black, white, stained frames, super simple, or they're going to end up being a little bit on the cheap side, cheap looking. So to avoid the craft store look, people say that to me at work all the time. I don't want a craft store look. You could have an old frame cut down to the size you need it, and then you could paint it. So those are some ideas as to how to keep it affordable and how to do it yourself. Shelley Crouch wants to know if you need to prepare your piece before you bring it to a framer. It depends on the piece. So if you have been mindful the entire time that you've been stitching to not get it dirty, then you could probably just take it off of whatever you have it on, either your board or your scroll, and bring it to the framer, and they should be fine. If there's a few loose wrinkles in it, that will come out in mounting, so you don't need to iron it. If there are strong creases from where maybe your embroidery hoop crushed the stitches, or the fabric, I should say, that fabric needs some water to loosen up so you can get rid of that crease. The easiest way to do that is with steam from your iron. Just hold the fabric over the steam. It should loosen up enough so that when it's stretched, there's no crease. If it's really a determined crease and it doesn't want to really relax, you might want to soak it in some water. That said, you want to make sure that the threads that you used are color fast. So if you have leftover floss, you'll soak it in water. If any of the color comes out, you might have to just live with the crease or just keep trying it with some steam. The cleanliness of it is pretty much the only thing I would say you would need to prepare. Anything else, the framer's going to do for you. So like I said, if there's little loose wrinkles in the fabric, that'll come out in the mounting. And then Lorraine Bree wanted to know if there's a best way to ship your finished piece to a picture framer. She said to me, but to any picture framer, as far as shipping goes, it doesn't really matter. Again, the thing is you don't want it to crease. So you don't want to put it in a flat, fold it into a flat envelope and then like press it down. You could put it in a tube mailer, or you can just lay it if it's small enough to be flat. Either way, that's the only thing that I would say you need to think about for shipping. And then finally, Donna J wants to know where I learned how to frame. So I learned how to frame when I was a teenager at a craft store. And then I got a new job at a picture frame shop, which happens to be the one that I own. I started there pretty early. I was still in college when I got the job at my shop. Excuse me. So I learned just from being taught by a few older people, kind of like an apprenticeship without it being labeled an apprenticeship. And then the original owner of the shop eventually wanted to retire and I bought it and I've had it for 19 years. So yeah, I just kind of learned as I went. I mean, that said, I've also taken classes. A lot of the bigger, or I shouldn't say that, there's a Professional Picture Framers Association that runs continuing education for framers all through the year, and we have a couple trade shows during the year as well. So I go to them and I take classes just to keep learning about new techniques, new materials, that sort of a thing. So Nora Bush would like to know more about the framing process. And if you're like Nora and want to know more about what happens with your cross stitch at a picture framer studio, hit the subscribe button so I can show you more in the future. And also in the down bar, there is links to my consultation videos. So check them out and see if they help answer any of your questions, help you understand a little bit more about the process. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them below. Thanks for being with me, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.